Okay, good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us live if you're able to, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching the recordings on Facebook or YouTube. This is our My Empowered Political Life. I am Ian Foster, business and tax attorney, and your host here. And this is April 11th, 2025. And so on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court ordering the return of Abrego Garcia. Now, we will do a quick background. We have covered this case quite a bit on this show, but we're going to do a background just to catch us up to where we are today. So you may recall Abrego Garcia fled persecution in El Salvador as a teenager. He's been here a long time now. He initially entered the United States illegally, and in 2019, an immigration court said he cannot be deported to El Salvador. A few weeks ago, he was accosted by federal agents. We assume they were federal agents anymore. These folks are not identifying themselves. He was accosted in front of his 5-year-old son. He's from Maryland, and he was immediately sent to SCOTUS in El Salvador. We've also covered on our previous episodes, including yesterday, the horrible conditions in this place, SCOTUS. A federal judge has called it one of the worst prisons in the Western Hemisphere. According to the available evidence, Abrego Garcia appears to be a model immigrant. He works hard. He has a family. He provides for his family. He commits no crimes. There's no evidence of gang affiliation, no credible accusation of criminal activity. In court, the Department of Justice admitted that they deported him in error. They called it a, quote, administrative mistake, though they then refused to explain what the nature of the mistake was or how it could happen. And they were also forced to admit in court that they could not provide evidence of gang affiliation or any criminal activity. Now, remember, this is the case where the Department of Justice argued that once someone is sent to El Salvador, nothing can be done, even if the government made a mistake in sending the person in the first place. This is also the case where the Department of Justice attorney was indefinitely suspended because, as far as I can tell, he told the truth in court. He answered the judge's questions truthfully. He admitted that Abrego Garcia had permission to remain. He admitted there was no evidence of crimes. He admitted this was a mistake. And then that attorney, as well as his supervisor, were put on indefinite suspension less than 24 hours after they answered the judge's questions truthfully. So this case was initially filed in Maryland Federal District Court, where Judge Polishinas ordered the government to return Abrego Garcia to the United States. So from Judge Shinas, the administration had no legal authority to arrest him, no justification to detain him, and no grounds to send him to El Salvador, let alone to deliver him into one of the most dangerous prisons in the Western Hemisphere. Again, from Judge Shinas, to avoid clear irreparable harm, and because equity and justice compels it, the court grants the narrowest and dare say only relief warranted and orders that defendants return Abrego Garcia to the United States. So that was the court order. And you may recall that the administration thumbed its nose at the federal judge and basically refused to comply. At the same time, they appealed to the Fourth Circuit, where it went in front of a 3-judge panel, and that panel unanimously upheld the order and said Abrego Garcia must be returned. So the government lost again in the Fourth Circuit. This is Judge Stephanie Hacker on the Fourth Circuit who wrote the opinion. The United States government has no legal authority to snatch a person who is lawfully present in the United States off the street and remove him from the country without due process. The government's contention otherwise, and its argument that the federal courts are powerless to intervene, are unconscionable. Again, from Judge Hacker on the Fourth Circuit, the government may not rely on its own failure to circumvent its own ruling that Abrego Garcia could not be removed to El Salvador. More importantly, the government cannot be permitted to ignore the Fifth Amendment, deny due process of law, and remove anyone it wants simply because it claims the victims of its lawlessness are members of a gang. In other words, everybody gets due process. The government cannot just make naked assertions with no evidence and ship people off to a foreign prison. They have to follow the law. Again, from Judge Hacker, nor can the government be permitted to disclaim any ability to return those it has wrongfully removed by citing their physical presence in a foreign jurisdiction. This is a slippery and dangerous constitutional slope. If due process is of no moment, what is stopping the government from removing and refusing to return a lawful permanent resident or even a natural born citizen? This, as we have discussed in my previous videos on this subject, is exactly the implication that those of us in the legal profession have been worried about. If you can deny some people due process, you can deny everyone due process. And that means if the government is allowed to get away with it here, they can literally deport natural born citizens to a torturous prison in El Salvador. So the government then appealed to the Supreme Court. You may remember earlier this week, there was briefly in place an order to return Abrego Garcia by last Monday. The Supreme Court, hours before, put a stay on that order, but then it only took them a few days to come down with their own ruling on this. And the Supreme Court has now also said that Abrego Garcia must be returned to the U.S. The decision is unsigned with no dissents, though it does contain a concurrence. It's an unsigned opinion, so we're not technically supposed to say it was 9-0, but in practice, it was 9-0. There are no dissents. So from the Supreme Court order, the district court order properly requires the government to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. So the Supreme Court is basically ordering the government to rewind here, to bring him back and rewind to where we were a few weeks ago and handle his case the way they're supposed to under the law. Again, from the Supreme Court order. For its part, the government should be prepared to share what it can concerning the steps it has taken and the prospect of further steps. In other words, this is the Supreme Court telling the government, we're watching you. We don't want you to just ignore this the way you ignored the other court orders recently. We're going to be watching, and we're going to be asking, what steps are you taking to comply with this order? Justice Sotomayor wrote a concurrence. A concurrence is a separate opinion by a judge explaining their own reasoning on why they agree with the majority, or in this case, unanimous opinion. So Justice Sotomayor, to this day, the government has cited no basis in law for Abrego Garcia's warrantless arrest, his removal to El Salvador, or his confinement in a Salvadorian prison, nor could it. It couldn't because there is no basis in law and there is no evidence. Justice Sotomayor goes on. The government now requests an order from this court permitting it to leave Abrego Garcia, a husband and father without a criminal record, in a Salvadorian prison for no reason recognized by the law. The only argument the government offers in support of its request that the United States cannot grant relief once a deportee crosses the border is plainly wrong, and it is plainly wrong. The government is saying once the deportee crosses the border into a foreign country, there's nothing they can do, except the government has, on many occasions, brought back wrongly deported people before. So now they're arguing they can't. We know for sure they can because they've done it. Justice Sotomayor, again, the government's argument, moreover, implies that it could deport and incarcerate any person, including U.S. citizens, without legal consequence, so long as it does so before a court can intervene. And again, this is what I've been saying in my Doors and Corners segment for the last couple of weeks on this case and on other similar cases. Please smash that like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Again, those are the simple, easy things you can do that help us out a great deal in getting out the word. The more likes and subscribes and shares we get, the more people will see it and the more people we can inform. Remember, I follow all of this news, this legal and political news, as part of my business and my job. I follow it so you don't have to. And so I'm giving you these daily updates. All right, let's get to Doors and Corners. We're like a good detective entering a room. We look behind doors and look around corners.
Room. I kept telling him, I said, there's doors and corners, kid. If you don't clear the room, if you don't come in slow, that room will eat you.
Well, there you go. We're going into some dark rooms. As we look into some of this stuff, we're going to go in slow and think ahead about the implications so the room does not eat us. So where are we going now? Remember, the administration has already ignored the original district court order, as well as orders from other district courts in similar immigration cases. Remember, the administration has literally argued in court that nothing can be done once someone is in El Salvador. That's not true. because the government has previously brought back wrongly deported people. So we know it's not true. But it's more than not true. It's incredibly disturbing in its implications. And the judges are seeing these implications. Judges at every level, district court, circuit court, Supreme Court, have rejected the administration's argument in this case. Judges at every level have expressly noted that the administration's argument, if upheld, would mean they could send even U.S. citizens to foreign prisons with no due process. The judges see where this is going. They don't like where this is going, and they're trying to put a stop to it. Now, remember what we talked about yesterday. The administration has openly admitted that they are considering deporting U.S. citizens to El Salvador. So when judges speculate that the administration could simply use this argument to send U.S. citizens to a horrible foreign torture dungeon, they weren't just making stuff up. Donald Trump and his press secretary have openly admitted that they are considering doing exactly this to U.S. citizens. So stop thinking this can only happen to the worst criminals. Stop thinking it only happens to those people. Stop thinking this cannot happen to you. Now, it's bad enough that the administration was openly defying lower court orders, because we're getting to the real showdown here. Will the administration now openly defy a unanimous order from the Supreme Court? That's the showdown. That's the big question. If the administration does defy the order, and if nothing is done to stop them, then we may be looking at the final days of the rule of law in the United States. The rule of law is the term we use for our system of laws, where everybody is supposed to be treated equally and fairly and get due process, where the government cannot just deport you or jail you or punish you without telling you what you did wrong and giving you an opportunity to challenge it in court, where the government has to obey the laws, where the president has to obey the laws, where everybody has to obey the same set of laws, where nobody gets special treatment. Now, we know it's not perfect. Obviously, our system has inequalities and injustices, but we do have a basic level of rule of law, or at least we have for a long time. Now, if this administration can ignore the Supreme Court and get away with it, then so can the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. It doesn't take long for the rule of law to break down. And if you have an administration, not just this one, but every administration now on, if the president gets to just do whatever he or she wants to anyone, anytime, without having to give them due process, without having to obey the law, without having to obey court orders, that is no longer a functioning democracy. This is what's happening. For all of us who thought, what would it be like to live through the early days of losing a functioning democracy? We're seeing what it's like. We need to stick together. Don't let the government pick us off one by one. We need to stick together on this and show a lot of solidarity that as a people, we're not going to tolerate it. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to see you all tomorrow.